Hello, I'm Michael Sean Comerford, and this is the end of the story cycle. The Atlantic Coast in Climate Crisis. We're on Marco Island, which was devastated by Hurricane Ian in the fall of 2022. The whole island was underwater, and you can see this culture of high-rises along the coastline. And this is on the Gulf side, but I rode for 3.5 months in 15 states and 3,300 miles along the most populated coast of the United States, 112 million people interacting with the environment from Maine to Key West. And I am now wrapping it up for you, and I'm going to try to make it succinct. So, what we did, and let me start with this is the second of two slow journalism projects. The first one was The Beast of Main Street, which is a book I published in Maine right before this project. And that was a bicycle ride from Chicago to Los Angeles along Route 66, asking everybody about COVID. I got the most amazing answers and articulate interviews. However, I had a theory then that I have now, and I will state up front of this update that it has to do with this great quote from the theologian, 19th century Danish theologian Kierkegaard, who once said, "The problem with life is that you have to live it forward, but you only understand it looking back." And then that project in Route 66, I found lots of people talking about COVID, talking about the cures, talking about politics, talking about religion, talking about fatalism, talking about everything, science. But I was surprised when I looked at all the interviews and saw that they were most compelling when they were talking about life and death issues and the meaning of life. What makes life worth living during pandemics? And I believe this is a first, where someone was focused on the meaning of life during pandemics. We've had pandemics even before we were fully developed as Homo sapiens in evolution. And we have viruses in us that predate our evolution. And yet, The Beast of Main Street was a new way of looking at pandemics, in that it turns out we all start thinking about meaning of life issues during these times, and it caught some of those views. And this one, I don't really understand either. I really believe I will deepen my understanding as I look back on my interviews that spanned Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, the New Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, DC, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. The 1,000 miles of Florida coastline they have here. I was on the East Coast, and I went through the great cities of the United States, the great population centers here in the United States, where arguably, culturally, militarily, the most powerful and technologically the most powerful country in the history of the world. This coast is the most populated and has the financial centers, the technological centers, has the political centers, the media centers of this country, all facing climate issues in their hometowns of Portland, Boston, Providence, of New York City, of Philadelphia, Wilmington, Baltimore, DC, Norfolk, Charleston, Savannah, the great cities of Florida, St. Augustine, Daytona Beach, Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Miami Beach, and Key West. The grand panorama of this trip is mind-boggling. It was gorgeous. It was taking it all in 5-minute conversations where I asked 3 simple questions about the past, the present, the future. Has the climate changed much since you were a kid? Are you concerned about it now? And what can you do about it? What can we do about it in the future? Are you positive? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about it in the future? Because as this as we try to change the history of this planet, to try to change the climate of the whole Earth, something that's never been tried before, we have to get our minds around it. It matters what the people think, what the ordinary people think. And so this project is part journalism, part oral history, part art, because it is looking at what will have to change, which is the general beliefs of people that will lead to leadership changes and corporate changes and agricultural changes and commerce changes that will all be necessary to change the world, to change the earth. So I started my trip in the hurricane season after Hurricane Ian, got a little bit of Hurricane Nicole up in Massachusetts. I got hit by the bomb cyclone, which hit 2/3 of the United States, killed many people. And I was on the Outer Banks, where it was a great feeling of vulnerability in those very thin islands. And the ferries all stopped, and people hunkered down in their homes on stilts. And the water came flooding over the islands. And so I didn't hit, by the way, I started up in Maine in warm weather, in the 70-degree weather in November. And I didn't hit any snow as I was going down for 3 months. And now in November. Now in February. And so weather was the background, and it was meant to be the background. I hit a lot of storms along the way. I slept out in the cemeteries and in the woods and in the abandoned properties where there was no trespassing signs, and woke up to frost on the ground like snow, and rode through freezing rain and wind and so forth. But it all added to the majesty and to the awe of this great, complicated coast that goes through northeastern rocky coasts and one climate zone to another, from the northern climate zones down to the tropic climate zones, to rocky coastlines, to the sandy coastlines, to the barrier islands, all up and down the East Coast. I went the entire length of Long Island, which was a revelation, how vulnerable that place is, and with its own barrier islands. And Cape Canaveral, which is also at risk. And what conclusions did I come to? I have yet to figure out what I want to say about it. But in general, I found a lot of people educated about the fact that there is climate change. They just don't know what to do, whether to be pessimistic or optimistic, or what can they do about it. But it was definitely all over the place. People relying on religion, saying you don't have to do anything, God's going to take care of you. And people relying on people just denying that it even exists. But overall, I found them, once again, just like the Route 66 Beast of Main Street slow journalism project. I found people compelling, articulate, and insightful. And so in the end, I found that this was, once again, an original way, a new angle to come at the overarching issue of our time, that being the climate of the earth. And hopefully I've, with this project, contributed in a small way to another way of looking at this, and the general feel for the urgency we have to find a way to address what we know is coming at us. There's a general, belief in science, which in other ages, other centuries, there just wasn't. So that's encouraging. So there were great encouraging signs and pessimistic signs. And we're going to have to wait for a book to come out on it. I'm going to think more about it. But I will say, I was inspired, it was awesome, and this ride was nothing short of going from the Rocky Coast during election season in November of 2022, riding through these towns with signs on every lawn, and then going through these New England towns that look like Hallmark movies, and during Christmas, during the Thanksgiving season, and then during Christmas season, and then during New Year's along the coastline. These are important times and marked by human beings as we wrestle with our environment and with these times. And I was amazed looking at some of these places, knowing that in the future this will be underwater. I went by the Statue of Liberty, wondering, hey, how much of this area around New York is going to be underwater? What part of this shoreline? Long Island. People who were talking about abandoning the Keys in future years. So I was looking at what I was writing, where I was writing, who I was talking to, aware that I was part of a timeline of history. And yet, at an inspiring time when we were attempting to change the entire earth for the better. So all I can say is this is the end of a great slow journalism project and a great ride. And I thank you for coming along, and keep riding on. Thank you again.